We touched on this a second ago. One of the big things about RE4 is that it is this weird kind of pivot from classic horror to, action horror.
Yeah.
A lot of games have this. It's not a problem necessarily. We talk about horror games. We talk about games that have horror themes. And, they're not always like. The big one, I think, is Bloodborne.
Right.
Which I think is a horror game because it's completely steeped in horror themes.
Right.
Mechanically, it's an action RPG.
Guys. We can't talk about Bloodborne every week on this show.
We're going to. I'm sorry.
We have to.
I love Bloodborne.
Yes. I mean, like
Is Bloodborne a horror game?
No.
Is Bloodborne a horror game?
It looks like one. I've never played it.
Okay. Because it's too scary?
It looks too scary.
Yeah, it's a horror game.
I'm kind of scared.
I guess I'm outvoted here. I don't know. It's just I can't take a Souls game as a horror game. Like, you wouldn't say Elden Ring is a horror game. You wouldn't say Dark Souls is a horror game. Yes, they're very horror thematic, but they're not horror games. There's the only thing I guess it has it going for being a horror game is that you could die. You feel like you could die at any given second.
I bet you
you fight werewolves.
Yeah, you fight werewolves, skeletons, probably mummies.
It's got tons of sort of Lovecraft influence, and obviously Lovecraft is known for his contributions to the action role playing genre of fiction. No, horror. He's known for horror. It's a horror game.
It is a. Okay, so like genre-wise, yes, it is technically an action RPG, right?
Yes.
But it is thematically just incredibly deeply horror to me.
Yeah, I don't know. It's such a weird one because like you look at other big horror games take Left 4 Dead.
Right.
Left 4 Dead is very heavy action, very co-op centric. It's technically classified as a horror game. But again, for me, it's a
co-op shooter.
It's a co-op shooter.
Right.
It's not a horror game.
Is Call of Duty Zombies a horror game?
No, it's not because it's so weird.
This feels like is a hot dog a sandwich question.
Yeah,
It's like what is your definition of a horror game at this point?
Well, so my
A
argument
hot dog
here,
sandwich is a horror game.
if you eat the hot dog sideways, it's a sandwich, but if you eat it vertically, it's a taco. It's very simple. But again, that's a mechanical issue.
What if you take a bite out of
games,
the middle of it?
then it's corn on the cob. Anyway, the thing with horror is that it can be a mechanic or it can be a narrative theme,
Right.
And like in the case of like when I think like a pure horror game, it's something like Outlast.
That's my go-to.
Or like Amnesia, because
Evil
that's a game where
Within.
the goal is I mean that is a dedicated horror game. Like you pretty much are devoid of abilities. Like you are not. You're not jumping around and collecting things as well as being scared.
Yeah.
But then
Right.
you have things that are like, completely, steeped in like horror elements like Bloodborne or Castlevania, where it's like this is, capital H horror flavored.
Right.
But Darkstalkers is a game with like a mummy and a sexy Dracula and then like a regular Dracula and then I think a Wolfman or something. And it's like, is that a horror game?
No, it's a fighting game.
Exactly.
So yeah, that is like my argument for Bloodborne not being a horror game because there's so many games. Like you wouldn't say Castlevania is a horror game. It's horror themed, but it's a Metroidvania. It is its own genre.
So is The Last of Us a horror game?
Yes.
Yes, I would put Last of Us as like a psychological horror because it's more
survival horror, though.
or survival horror. Excuse me.
Right.
Yes, because it's more about like surviving in the world versus like being afraid of the actual creatures that are there. Like, I don't know. I'm just not afraid of any of the infected or the clickers and things like that in that.
Well, that sounds like a personal
That could be.
problem, I
that
guess.
could just be. That just. I guess I'm the bravest person on the gas.
That like a hotel apartment complex you go in The Last of Us 2 is like straight up horror, right? Like
Yes.
there's it's
the
murky.
entire thing is like gross and like infected.
There's murky, wet basements you go in with like one shank, and like you're like, I got to get through this whole thing, and they hear me.
I just punch everybody.
Okay.
Yeah, well, okay. Well,
Is Little Nightmares a horror game?
Little Nightmares.
Is that a horror game?
Yes.
Or is that a puzzle platformer?
I would say Little Nightmares is because it's about like the world that it's set in is so it's very drenched in horror, and I know that's what we said with Bloodborne. I know we said Bloodborne. Let me get to my point.
Okay.
But the element of like it has this element of putting you in this constant state of fear while you're playing this game, and where your character is like constantly just afraid and like you're trying to you're finding your way, and like your life and survival depends on you getting from point A to point B.
Bloodborne has an entire mechanic where if you like look at certain enemies, you go mad.
It's so
I
scary.
think what you're trying to say though, right, is like the way the character is written actually has a lot to play. If your character is like not scared and it's just badass walking through these horror scenarios, it's like, okay, why should I be scared?
Right.
But if the character itself is like put in a horror situation and they act like a normal person, or like oh my god, this is
maybe
so
okay,
weird.
all right.
maybe honestly, maybe that is
I
the key
hadn't thought of
element.
that.
What makes a horror game is whether or not you can kill the thing that's trying to kill you.
I think, yeah.
Maybe,
I think it's a little bit of that. I think it comes down to kind of the narrative directors on the games, the writers that are writing the dialogue and stuff like that. It really kind of comes into that element to kind of determine like is it horror? Or
If
not
they
horror?
write it by candlelight, it's horror, and if they don't, then it's a regular video game.
Yeah, do not
think-
use fluorescent lights
I
when you're
think
writing
that-
your horror games.
Yes, that's true. I think like the bigger issue at play here is that we think of games mechanically first and
Yes.
thematically second. So that when people think of Mass Effect, they're not like it's a sci-fi game, it's a space opera. They're like it's a action or RPG, or it's a like they come up with like what are you actually doing moment to moment.
Right.
That defines the genre it's in faster than like what you're doing thematically or what kind of things you're fighting or like what color the lights are and stuff like a lot of that like obviously changes the mood and everything like that, but the moodiness of it is secondary to what you're doing mechanically, right?
And I think that's kind of where we get in the differentiation between games and movies.
Yeah.
Because, games are such an interactive experience that is the primary thing that people pick up and play games for the most part. There are a lot of people that play games for the environment, the story and stuff first. I don't want to take it away from them. But I would say a larger chunk of the gaming audience as a whole plays games for the interactive to push buttons, kill things,
Right.
run away from things,
And there's,
jump on things.
there's largely accepted genre terms in movies too. Like recently, John Carpenter did an interview, and they were just like, "What do you think about elevated horror?" And he was like, "I don't know what that is. You did make that up?" And they're like, "Well, like A24 stuff." And he's like, "I get what you're saying, but like I don't know what you're talking about." Like because in movies you're mostly just like you can have like there's like the slasher horror, right? And there's like monsters. There's like poltergeist, spectral ghost stuff. There's all these different like pockets. You could even be like, oh, romantic horror or like.
So is elevated horror just like psychological horror? Like
I don't like the term.
basically
It's
every Jordan
like-
Peele like horror film.
I
I mean,
guess
Hereditary
yeah.
is a family film, I think.
Very much, very much.
Yeah, I mean that. Okay.
I have brain problems, but Now, is Count Chocula a horror serial?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes, 100%.
Well, now
Yeah.
I'm glad we can agree on something. Anyway, what do you think? Which of these games are horror games? What makes a horror game? What's your favorite horror game? And also, happy Halloween.